So what this means, so given this convergence, we can actually predict certain events that will happen over the next 2 to 4 years, okay? Because they all want these things to happen together, all right? So let's look at some quick predictions. Okay? First prediction, of course, is that the US will use ground troops. Because using ground troops will create a national draft. And what does a national draft do? It creates a civil war, right? A lot of young people are going to refuse to fight in this war. And this is going to create protests. Then America will have no choice but to deploy the National Guard. And this will create the recipe for a lot of civil conflict in America, okay? Another thing that will happen is because you use ground troops, you will lose the war, and then CENTCOM, which is the American military in the Middle East, will then transfer over to Israel. Okay? What's happening in this war is that the economies of the GCC are being destroyed, and that's part of the plan, okay? Because for Israel to achieve the Greater Israel Project, it needs to absorb the GCC and parts of Turkey and parts of Egypt, okay? So another way of saying this is that the GCC is basically finished. The intention is to collapse their economies and make them irrelevant, right? The third thing we can expect is that Turkey will enter this war, and Saudi Arabia actually, will enter the war. Because you want to use this war to weaken opposition to these eschatologies as much as possible, okay? So Turkey and Saudi Arabia will enter this war, and they will suffer tremendously because of their participation. All right. Again, the Al-Aqsa Mosque will be destroyed. Okay? And then you have the rise of Persia. Okay? The rise of Persia. Why is this important? Because you need the Islamic world to unite against Israel for the end of days, right? So you don't mind if actually Iran wins this war, because by winning this war, Iran will activate its Persian identity. And this is important for eschatology because in the war of Gog and Magog, people are interpreting Gog and Magog, which will march against Israel. They're interpreting Gog and Magog to be Persia and Russia. Okay? Okay? Together they will march against Pax Judaica. Number 6 is that in Israel, you will achieve the Pax Judaica and the Greater Israel Project. Okay? So the Greater Israel Project and Pax Judaica are not the same thing, guys. Greater Israel is just basically the territory that the Israelis believed that God had promised their ancestor Abraham. Pax Judaica is a one world government, okay, based on AI surveillance and the mark of the beast. So what will happen is that Israel will use this war to expand its territory, and then what will happen is that capital, technology, will then start to flow to Israel in order to create the Pax Judaica. So think of companies like NVIDIA, Oracle, Microsoft, Google. Well, they'll probably transfer themselves to Israel because that is where the power will rest. Okay? So Pax Judaica. Then you will have Russia winning the war in Ukraine, okay? And then return Greeks to Constantinople. Basically, another way of saying this is, it is possible that the Greeks go to war against Turkey, and then Russia supports the Greeks and return the Greeks to Istanbul, okay? But then you're like, wait a minute, Turkey is a NATO member. Well, we can also expect destruction of Europe, okay? The end of NATO, basically. So, this war in Ukraine it's not just about Russia protecting its borders. This war in Ukraine is also meant to achieve orthodox eschatology, to destroy Europe, to destroy NATO, so that Russia can achieve the third Rome prophecy. That means the destruction of Europe. So I will discuss the Russian-Ukraine war later on as we go along, okay? But what I'm trying to show you is that just by, okay, analyzing the most extreme eschatologies of different religious traditions, you can then, from this analysis, pick out points in which they agree. Okay? And at these points, you can figure out then how they will affect current geopolitics to make certain predictions about how the war will progress, about how the world will transform itself in the next 2 to 4 years. Okay? So this is called the law of eschatological convergence. It gives us tremendous insight into why things are turning out the way they are. Okay? Because again, I keep on saying this, but purely from a geopolitical perspective, purely from a realpolitik perspective, this war in Iran makes no sense. But if you look at it from an eschatological perspective, then it makes perfect sense. Okay? Any questions? Yes.
But I think, like, if we look into the war between America and Iran, I think Trump is trying to destroy Iran as the same way that he destroys Venezuela, but it fails, which led Iran to fight back. So I think this could also explain in a political way, but not religious.
Okay. All right. That's a great point in that, listen, there's an explanation, which is that Trump is just stupid. He's arrogant. They had too much success in Venezuela. They go into Iran, and they think it's the same thing. And now they're losing, okay? And because they're losing, they are just panicking, okay? Okay, that's true. And if this explanation is true, then what will happen, what we can expect to happen is that Trump declares victory and goes home. Okay? That's what we can expect. And if the US does go home, then you're right. Okay? So we can expect, but sorry, the question then is what happens next few months? All right. What you need to understand is this. War is not simple. Once you start a war, you can't end the war. All right, so let me explain really quickly why, okay? So you have Iran, and the main advantage that Iran has over the United States is the GCC cannot defend itself, okay? Because it's just a desert. And Iran, it's a mountain fortress, so it can shoot rockets, it can shoot drones at the GCC, and the GCC can't defend itself, okay? Before they thought these US bases could defend against Iran, but now you recognize these US bases can't defend themselves either, okay? All right, so the other thing that Iran did was close out the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, so he closed out the Strait of Hormuz. And this is important because the GCC then exports oil to Asia and gets back food, okay? So the GCC basically requires the Strait of Hormuz in order just to survive, okay? Now, let's just say that US, Donald Trump's like, you know what, screw this. This is a stupid war, the Middle East is stupid, we're gonna go home, okay? What happens now? What happens is that Iran says to GCC, hey man, you attacked us. You destroyed our infrastructure, you destroyed our economy, you have to pay a compensation, okay? Right? Also, hey man, now we control the Strait of Hormuz, so if you want to use Strait of Hormuz, you have to pay us a toll. You have to pay us a tax. Right? So all this money of the GCC, before it's going to the United States to fuel the US economy, now where does it go? It goes to Iran. Right? That's a lot of money, man. We're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars. And what will Iran use with this money? It will use this money to repair its economy. So in 5 to 10 years, this is going to be an economic miracle. where now Iran is able to industrialize really fast. And as a result, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is that the United States leaves the Middle East, Iran becomes the superpower and controls the entire Middle East, right? Now Israel has nuclear weapons. And so what's going to happen is that Israel and Iran will sign a peace treaty, okay? But the United States won't be involved. The United States goes home, it doesn't get any money from the GCC, and what's going to happen to the US economy? It's going to collapse. Why? Because the entire US economy is based on the stock market, on finance, on AI, on investment from the GCC, right? So the question then is, can the Americans go home? The answer is, no, they can't. Because if they go home, the economy is going to collapse, and the people are going to have a revolution anyway. So you're better off sending people to Iran than have the people in America cause a revolution, right? Okay? So you're right in that it's possible that Donald Trump made a mistake, but it doesn't matter if it was intentional or accidental. You have the same outcome. And strangely enough, this outcome that you have matches that, aligns with these different eschatologies in the world. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, all right. Any more questions? All right, okay, so we'll continue this next week, guys, okay?
Here is a deep and long review of the provided transcript, written in the style of a YouTuber creating a video essay. Video title screen, The Eschatological Convergence, Decoding the Next 4 Years, a Deep Dive. Intro music, moody, cinematic synthwave with a slight Middle Eastern tonal flair. Visual, a montage of conflicting images. U.S. soldiers protests the Dome of the Rock, the Israeli flag, a map of the Greater Israel concept, the Persian flag, a Russian Orthodox church, and a futuristic cityscape with AI imagery. The video cuts to the host, sitting in a dimly lit, book-lined room, speaking directly to the camera with an intense, thoughtful expression. Host, what if the chaos we see in the world isn't just random? What if it's not just political incompetence or economic cycles? What if instead it's the grinding together of ancient, apocalyptic prophecies, forcing the future into a predetermined shape? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are not just talking about geopolitics. We are going to peel back the layers of conventional analysis and dive headfirst into something that sounds like a conspiracy thriller, but is being discussed in think tanks, religious seminaries, and intelligence agencies worldwide. We're looking at a leaked, or let's say, a recorded lecture that presents a framework called the Law of Eschatological Convergence. The core idea is simple, but its implications are terrifying. It suggests that by analyzing the end-of-days prophecies of the world's most powerful religious and political ideologies, specifically radical Zionist, evangelical Christian, and Orthodox Russian eschatology, you can find points where they agree. And at those points of agreement, you can predict actual geopolitical events in the next 2 to 4 years. The speaker in this lecture makes some bold, almost unbelievable predictions. But the question we have to ask is, are they just the rantings of a doomer, or is there a disturbing logic at play? Let's break down this lecture, point by point, and see if this convergence theory holds water. Visual, a title card appears. Part 1. The Convergence War as a Necessary Catalyst. Host, the lecture starts with a bang. It posits that the current conflict isn't a mistake, but a feature of the design. The first prediction is that the U.S. will use ground troops in the Middle East. Why? Not to win, but to trigger a specific chain reaction. The logic goes like this. Ground troops require a national draft. A national draft in a politically fractured America creates massive civil unrest, a civil war of protests, especially among young people. This unrest then necessitates the deployment of the National Guard on American soil. This creates the recipe for widespread civil conflict. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy designed to destabilize the U.S. from within. Now, from a purely realpolitik perspective, this is insane. Why would the US government intentionally destroy itself? But from an eschatological perspective, this chaos is necessary. It weakens the existing world order, making way for the next phase. The speaker then drops a bombshell. The US will lose this ground war. And as a result, CENTCOM, the entire American military apparatus in the Middle East, will effectively transfer its loyalty and assets to Israel. This isn't a defeat, it's a handoff. The idea is that the US military becomes the sword of Greater Israel. Visual, a title card. Part 2, The Greater Israel Project and the Fall of the GCC. Host, this leads us to the economic engine of the prophecy. The lecture claims the economies of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, are being deliberately destroyed. This isn't collateral damage, it's the plan. The goal is to make them economically irrelevant, to collapse their power structures so they can be absorbed. Why? For the Greater Israel Project. This isn't just about the West Bank. This is about a territorial expansion from the Nile to the Euphrates, which, as the speaker notes, would require absorbing the GCC, parts of Turkey and parts of Egypt. By collapsing their economies, you remove their ability to resist. You make them weak, desperate, and ready to be folded into a new, Israeli-dominated economic and security sphere, a Pax Judaica. The speaker predicts that Turkey and Saudi Arabia will be drawn into the war, not as saviors, but as sacrificial lambs. They will enter and suffer tremendously, further weakening any potential opposition to this new order. Visual, a title card. Part 3, The Rise of Persia and the War of Gog and Magog. Host, and here, where it gets really interesting, the lecture predicts the rise of Persia. It claims that Iran is meant to win this phase of the war. Why? Because in the eschatological story, you need a villain. You need a powerful, unified enemy to march against the new Pax Judaica. This directly taps into the prophecies of Gog and Magog. In certain interpretations, the Gog that marches on Israel is led by a power from the north, often identified as Russia, with Persia, Iran, as its key ally. So by allowing Iran to win, you are forging them into the necessary apocalyptic adversary. You are activating their Persian identity and giving them the strength and confidence to eventually lead a coalition against Israel, setting the stage for the final, prophesied confrontation. This dovetails perfectly with the next prediction. Russia will win its war in Ukraine. This isn't just about NATO expansion. This is about Orthodox Russian eschatology, the Third Rome prophecy. The destruction of Europe and NATO clears the way for Russia to fulfill its own destiny as the protector of the faith and the leader of the Orthodox world, making it free to turn its attention southward, towards Israel, in the final battle. He even throws in a wild card, the return of the Greeks to Constantinople, with Russia's support, as part of this Orthodox revival and the destruction of Turkey. It's a cascade of ancient hatreds and prophecies all collapsing into a single time frame. Visual, a title card. Part 4, The Pax Judaica, The End of Nations. Host, so what's the end game? It's not just territory. The speaker makes a crucial distinction. Greater Israel is the land, but Pax Judaica is the system. With Israel expanded and the U.S. military backing it, all power, economic, technological, military, will flow to Jerusalem. Think about it. Companies like NVIDIA, Oracle, Google, Microsoft. The lecture predicts they will effectively transfer their power base to Israel. Why? Because that's where the power will rest. This new world order will be run on AI surveillance, a centralized global control system that fits the description of the mark of the beast. It's a one-world government, born from the ashes of the old world, headquartered in a new, expanded Israel. Visual, a title card. Part 5, The Counterargument, Was It All a Mistake? Host, now. This is a compelling and terrifying narrative, but let's be good analysts. The lecture itself anticipates a major counterargument and it's posed by a brilliant question from the audience. The audience member asks, what if it's not prophecy? What if Trump just failed in Venezuela, got arrogant, tried the same thing in Iran, and is now losing? Isn't that a simpler, more logical explanation? The speaker's response is the key to understanding why this framework is so seductive. He says, in essence, it doesn't matter if it was intentional or a mistake. And this is the brilliant, horrifying core of the argument. Even if the war in Iran started because of American arrogance and stupidity, the U.S. cannot afford to lose. It cannot afford to go home. Why? Because if the U.S. retreats, Iran wins. Iran then controls the Strait of Hormuz. It then tells the GCC, you attacked us. You will pay us compensation. You will pay us a toll for every drop of oil. Trillions of dollars that used to flow into the U.S. economy, propping up the stock market and funding the American way of life, will now flow into Iran. Iran will use that money to rebuild and industrialize, becoming the uncontested superpower of the Middle East. The U.S. economy, built on GCC petrodollars and investment, collapses. So the choice for the U.S. elite is no longer a choice. It's not win or go home. It's escalate or face total economic collapse and a revolution from your own people. The structural reality of the war, regardless of its origin, traps the U.S. on a path that perfectly aligns with the eschatological prophecies. Visual, host leans forward, closer to the camera. Host, so what are we to make of all this? The law of eschatological convergence is a powerful analytical tool. It suggests that reality is being shaped not by rational state actors, but by fanatical belief systems driving policy from the shadows. It explains why wars that make no geopolitical sense continue to rage. It provides a roadmap for the next 2 to 4 years that is both specific and global in scope. Is it true? That's for you to decide. But here's my takeaway. Even if you don't believe in the prophecies, you have to believe that the people who do believe in them are in positions of power. And if they are acting on these beliefs, then this framework becomes the most accurate predictor of future events. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy powered by faith and fueled by fire. We are watching a convergence, not just of geopolitical interests, but of ancient hopes and fears, all colliding in real time. Outro music begins to swell, a more urgent, driving version of the intro theme. Host, what do you think? Is this a blueprint for the future or just an elaborate work of paranoid fiction? Is the chaos we see the result of prophecy or plain old human stupidity? Let me know in the comments below. We're going to be doing a follow-up deep dive specifically on the Russia-Ukraine aspect of this, so smash that like button and subscribe if you want to see it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Video ends with a montage of the same images from the intro, now speeding up and becoming more chaotic, ending on a screen that simply reads 2024-2028 before fading to black.